your moderator, Candace Malcolm, an independent journalist and the founder and editor-in-chief of True North. And I'm pleased to be sitting next to my co-moderator, Jamil Javani, who is a lawyer, writer, and as you just heard, the incoming president of the Canada Strong and Free Network.
Well, of course, we want to thank people who've made tonight and this conference possible. We thank our sponsor, Meta, for broadcasting tonight's debate on Facebook Live, and also tonight's presenting sponsor, Earnscliffe.
Okay, enough about us. Now the moment that everyone has been waiting for, let's meet the candidates in tonight's debate. So we have done a random draw with the campaigns to determine the order in which the candidates will appear on stage tonight. I will announce the candidates in that order. So first up, we have independent member of the Provincial Parliament in Ontario, Mr. Roman Baber. Next up, we have the former Premier of Quebec, Mr. Jean Charest. Next up, we have Member of Parliament, Mr. Pierre Poilievre. Next, we have Member of Parliament, Mr. Scott Aitchison. And last, but certainly not least, Member of Parliament, Dr. Leslyn Lewis. So thank you very much to all of the candidates for being here. We really appreciate it. And I'll just make a note to the audience that the candidates know very little about what is in store for them tonight. Neither the themes nor the questions were shared with any of the campaigns prior, only the format was shared.
And with that, let's get started with opening statements. We're going to start with you, Mr. Baber, 45 seconds.
Thank you. I'm Roman Baber. I came to Canada when I was 15, and we didn't have a cent to our name. But I always had Canadian opportunity, and I had every blessing this country has to offer, because all you need to do to succeed in Canada is work hard and be nice to people. I worked in the private sector for 12 years, joined and grew in small business, and was elected by the community that welcomed me as a new Canadian 20 years earlier. About a year and a half ago, I wasn't going to have it anymore, and I made a choice. I wasn't going to continue to inflict collateral harm on Canadians with lockdowns. I opposed my government and was removed from the Ontario PC caucus. I went on to fight for our kids, for our choice, for our democracy. Standing up for people is something I've done my entire career because I'm not afraid to say what I believe or to stand up for what's right. I'm not your typical politician. I don't even like politics, but I love my country and I love Canadians. And I'm not going to sit back and watch the erosion of Canada's democracy and Canada's opportunity. Thank you so much for hosting me tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. Mr. Charest, it's your 45 seconds.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting us tonight. And I hope this will be an opportunity for us to exchange ideas. And if I'm in this race, you'll know that if there's a common theme throughout my whole life, it has been the idea of Canada. And I have fought at every moment to preserve the unity of this country, whether it's the referendum in Quebec or when I was Premier of Quebec. I look at the country today and I see a country that's way below its potential and badly divided, whether it's separatism in Quebec or Western alienation. We cannot take our country for granted. And the answer is the Conservative Party of Canada. We are the national alternative. We have to live up to that responsibility, to the call of Canadians to be the national Conservative alternative to the Liberal government of Mr. Trudeau. And that's why I'm running, to unite the party so that the party will speak with one voice and one vision. And if you're tired of losing campaigns as we did in 15 and 19 And 21, if you've had enough of handing over power to Trudeau, well then, you will want a leader that's going to unite the party and elect a national conservative government.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Mr. Polyev.
Canadians believe they've lost control of their lives. Big, bossy government has taken their money and told them what to do, leaving the country desperate and divided. I'm running for Prime Minister to give you back control of your life by making Canada the freest nation on earth. Freedom means you should be free to choose your own medical decisions, free from vaccine mandates imposed on you by the state. Freedom means you control your own money, free from government-induced inflation that has made housing, food, and gas unaffordable. Freedom means expressing yourself without fear and freedom of the press by defunding the CBC and giving every Canadian the liberty to speak without fear. I'm running to put you back in charge of your life by making Canada the freest nation on earth, and that is exactly what I will do.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. Mr. Aitchison.
Well, thank you. This is our first gathering since the pandemic began, and of course our world has changed quite a bit. Has our movement met the challenges of our times? While many in this room have put a lot of effort into various causes over the past few years, has it created an impact? These are questions I'll ask my cabinet to reflect on as we govern. Accountability within our movement will make us better. Our values and our principles are timeless. Communities, families, free speech, freedom of religion, fiscal responsibility. Acting on these principles and debating with respect are the recipe for our movement's success. Our politics are increasingly divided, and we have stopped respecting those we disagree with. As conservatives, we must take inspiration from our principles and apply them to the challenges of today to make the future better for all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Dr. Lewis.
The fabric of our nation is being torn apart by cancel culture and wokeism. Provinces are threatening to leave our great confederation. Debt is piling up to the tune of $1.2 trillion. National unity is at an all-time low, and many people are traumatized by COVID lockdowns and government mandates. I am running to be a bridge builder, to unite the party and to unite this country. I am running to make sure that business owners will have the confidence to take chances again. We will develop our natural resources while protecting the environment. We will respect freedoms and uphold our Charter of Rights. I am running to make Canada the freest and most prosperous country in the world.
Thank you very much for those statements. We're now going to move to our first question. So in this round, all of the candidates will be asked the same question. One by one, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond without interruption. If, during their response, the candidate personally mentions another candidate by name, that named candidate will have a brief 15 seconds for a very brief rebuttal at the end of their time. When all of the candidates are finished their questions, if time allows, we will also have some additional debate and rebuttals. So here's the question, and first it will go to you, Mr. Aitchison. The Conservative Party of Canada has lost the last 3 elections. In particular, the party lost in 2021 despite being ahead in the polls. In your view, why did Erin O'Toole lose? Why have the Conservatives lost the last 3 elections? And what will you do to achieve a better strategy?
Well, consistency of our message is absolutely crucial. We need to put together a principled conservative platform that resonates with all Canadians in all parts of the country, and then we need to be consistent with that. That is the kind of leadership that I will bring, and it's the kind of leadership we need, one that respects all views in our party, one that respects all people. There's lots of different perspectives And we have to work together as a team. And until we can work together as a team, Canadians are not going to trust us. We have to work together.
Thank you very much. Next, the same question goes to you, Mr. Charest.
Well, thank you very much, Candace. And that's a key question for us as we look out. I mean, look at where we are in the country today. Out of 53 seats in the GTA, we have 4 seats. We have no seats in the Lower Mainland, no seats on the island of Montreal. There are 32 Bloc MPs in Quebec. And that begs the question, why is it that we're not successful? Can we actually form government if we're not successful in that part of the country? Of course not. We need to be able to unite the party, but also run on the conservative values we believe in. Fiscal conservatism, a market-based economy, economic policies that promote economic growth, and that includes oil, gas, mining, pipelines. We need to run on the principle of protecting the family, families. We need to also respect the rule of law, which is fundamental to any given society, and practice of federalism that includes all of the country. That is the calling of the Conservative Party of Canada, and the job of the next leader is to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. We'll put the same question to you, Dr. Lewis.
We need to return to our conservative principles. Families are the cornerstone of our society, and parents should have a right to raise their children in accordance with their values. We need to uphold our fundamental freedoms: freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience. And those who we elect should serve and respect our fundamental freedoms. We need to ensure that we do not invoke laws like the Emergencies Act and undermine the foundations of our democracy. We need to oppose things like digital currency and digital ID. We need to protect our national sovereignty. We need to be compassionate for our vulnerable, our seniors, the disabled, refugees, and we need to be good stewards of our natural resources. We also need to invoke fiscal responsibility and ensure that we do not saddle future generations with debt.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. We'll pose the same question to you, Mr. Baber. Why do the Conservatives keep losing?
Thank you. Look, I think we have to be clear about who we are and what we stand for. We lost the last 2 elections because many Canadians weren't sure where we stand. We should not be running to the right during leadership and running to the left during the general. We should not be afraid of the media or the left-wing Twitter mob. We don't need to play the game. We need to do right by Canadians, and that includes knowing where we stand. That differentiates us from the Liberal Party. Also in the last election, we failed to stand up for many Canadians. Many Canadians felt that the Conservative Party did not stand up for them against lockdowns, against passports, against mandates, and they went and they voted elsewhere or didn't vote at all. I'm uniquely positioned to speak to those voters and invite them to come back and reassure them that the Conservative Party will stand on principle and will always defend Canadians. And finally, we need to welcome diversity of opinion within our party. That is the true blue-white tent. When we're respectful of one another's opinion, we can disagree with each other, but we can unite at a time of election and win the next election.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. Finally to you, Mr. Polyev.
Well, I'm undefeated in 7 consecutive elections in a big Ontario multicultural city. And that's because I don't try to go through the liberal media to get my message out. I go around them. I deliver my message to millions of people through social media that we're seeing in the tens of thousands who've been coming out to my rallies, people who have never voted Conservative before in their lives. Secondly, I win because I campaign on our strengths. And our biggest strength right now is that we are the low-tax, low-inflation party that will make your dollar go far enough to buy a home, afford groceries, and fuel up your car. That's why it's important that we have a leader with an impeccable track record on taxes and the cost of living. We can't elect someone who has a record of raising taxes. I've been cutting taxes, fighting inflation, and empowering the working class my entire life, and we'll win an election with that message. Thank you.
All right, well, let's move on to some personalized.
Jamil,
Do we not have time for rebuttal?
Oh,
Yeah,
well, none of you mentioned each other. If you'd like to mix it up, let's go.
I thought,
Leslyn, do you want to go? Go ahead if you want to. Otherwise, well, I want to say something about the last campaign that we need to all be conscious of. Our candidates who ran in the GTA, when knocking on doors, were confronted again in 2021 with this idea that was put forward in 2015 about a barbaric telephone tip line. And the message it sent to them, we have 4 seats out of 53. The message it sent to new Canadians is, you are not welcome in the Conservative Party of Canada. The result and the outcome speaks for itself. One thing that we have to be clear on in the next campaign and the next leader is that we welcome new Canadians. They are part of the family. They are welcome and they are Canadians, period.
yes,
But
thank you,
those who
Mr.
were part of
Charest.
that campaign and proposed this idea need to account for that.
Thank you, Mr. Charest, for saying that. As someone who immigrated when I was 5 years old, I am in the best position to relate to new Canadians. I know what it's like, what they have gone through. I know what it's like to stand in a grocery line and not know if my debit card is going to go through for my groceries. I know what it's like to struggle to get through school and to have a heavy student loan debt. I am in the best position to welcome new Canadians in our party.
I think that in 2020, Canadians were not concerned about the barbaric snitch line. What they were concerned about is the snitch line on your neighbor if they had a friend over, or a snitch line about a church if they wanted to congregate. That is un-Canadian. I come from the former Soviet Union. I know what democracy is all about, and I know how precious our democracy is. And the fact that the conservative movement failed to stand up for democracy is something that is going to remain with us for a generation. And I'm uniquely positioned to speak on these issues credibly. I am committed to restoring Canada's democracy.
Let's go to some of the sitting MPs on that. What did you take from that accusation the Conservative Party didn't stand up for freedom during the pandemic? Pierre.
Well, I did
Mr.
stand
Poilievre.
up for freedom during the pandemic. From the very beginning, I
That's
was
not true.
I
That's
was
not
among the
true.
loudest voices in Parliament.
You were not one of the loudest
If-
voices, Mr.
I
Poilievre. You
could.
were not one of the loudest voices. In
I
fact,
could,
you did not speak up until it was
Actually,
convenient
that
for
is
you to
not
speak
true,
up.
Madam Lewis.
You did not
That is
even
not
go
true,
to
Madam Lewis.
the trucker protest. You actually went
could I
and
respond?
you took a picture in your neighborhood at a local stop.
Let's hear from
You
Mr.
did not
Poilievre,
speak up for
please.
the truckers.
Let's
and
hear
you
from
did
Mr.
not speak
Poilievre.
up the
Thank
loudest,
you.
Mr. Poilievre.
First of all, I did go to the trucker protest, both on Parliament Hill and in my community.
You took a picture
I
up
was
front, Mr.
there
Poilievre.
at the trucker protest. I was on the street. I was supporting those who were fighting for their freedoms.
When it was
and I
popular
did, and
for
I
you to
did. In
do
fact,
so.
I
When
did
it-
it.
only
if I
when it
could,
was popular
if
and
I could,
convenient.
if I could. In fact, I opposed the vaccine mandates as soon as they were announced. I am on public record doing it. I campaigned against the vaccine mandates throughout the entire election campaign. I never once wavered from that position. I also joined with several other Conservatives to lead the charge against the censorship bill, C-10, which we helped stop in the last Parliament and which I will stop in this Parliament. And we will fight tooth and nail to put a permanent end to vaccine mandates and other oppressive actions by the government that take away people's medical freedoms. Thank you.
And Mr. Aitchison will just give you a brief opportunity to respond as well.
I guess what I want to say here is that, this whole situation with the vaccine mandates, the truckers' convoy, it never should have happened in the first place. Leadership would have engaged people. It should never have happened in the first place. And the fact of the matter is this.
True.
Justin Trudeau used vaccines and vaccine status to divide Canadians in a corrosive, disgusting political display to win votes. And what we cannot do as a party is continue with the divisive, polarizing rhetoric that Justin Trudeau has been using for 7 years. It's disgusting. It's ripping our country apart. It's why I'm running, because we need to show some respect to each other before Canadians will trust us. Thank you.
Candace, can I?
We're going to move on to round two, but there will be plenty of time for future rebuttals, I promise you. So round two, we're going to ask each of you a personalized direct question based on your record, based on your public service up to this point. Each of you will have 90 seconds to answer this question, and then after each of you has answered, we will give you additional time for rebuttal. I'm going to begin with you, Mr. Polyev, and I want to start with the trucker convoy, something we've already been discussing. You've been criticized for your support for the trucker convoy. One of your fellow candidates has even said you should be disqualified for leadership of the party based on your engagement with the convoy. As we all know, public opinion on the trucker convoy is sharply divided. The Trudeau government and the mainstream media have gone to great lengths to vilify the truckers. And back in February, you said that you were, quote, proud of them.
That's right.
Has your opinion on the trucker convoy changed since? And is your support of the truckers a liability moving forward?
No and no. My position has not changed. I said at the very outset, before they even arrived, that I simultaneously stood with the law-abiding and peaceful truckers who were fighting for their livelihoods and liberties, while condemning any individual who breaks the law, blocks critical infrastructure, or behaves badly. That is the position I took then. It's the position I take now. Now, Mr. Charest learned about the trucker convoy on CBC, like other liberals, and he misrepresented them. He believes that I should be censored. He believes I should be canceled from this leadership race and disqualified, in his words, because I don't share his liberal viewpoint. That is the kind of cancel culture and censorship you would expect from Justin Trudeau, but instead we're getting it from this liberal on this stage. Frankly, Mr. Charest, for you to talk about law and order is a little bit rich, given that your party, your Liberal Party, took $500,000 of illegal donations when you were the head of that party. The average trucker has more integrity in his pinky finger than you had in your entire scandal-plagued Liberal cabinet. So I do stand up for the freedoms of Canadians, and I acknowledge that the working class has been demolished in this country over the last couple of years. We don't need elites who've been able to rely on special contracts with Huawei to look down on them and call them criminals. Instead, we need to stand up for the people who are struggling and give them hope for the future, and that's what I will do.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev, and there will be an opportunity for rebuttals at the end of this round. So we're going to move on to Dr. Lewis, your question. Dr. Lewis, you are publicly pro-life, and you have proudly shared your social conservative views with Canadians. However, as we saw in the 2019 election, the legacy media demonized leader Andrew Scheer for his Christian views and beliefs. In a matter of days, the media changed the narrative to be entirely about abortion and gay marriage. So if you were leader of the party, how would you handle this issue? And what do you say to the large number of conservatives and Canadians who simply don't want to have a debate about abortion?
I think it's very important that in a free and democratic society, we are free to debate any issue. And I tell people, I am pro-life. Many of my friends are pro-choice, and we have healthy discussions about the future. And there is so much that we agree on, and we need to come together as a society to determine that we can work out things, even controversial things like abortion. I still don't know where these gentlemen stand on this issue. I don't know whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, and the media will hound them. For example, Mr. Pierre Poilievre has ran from the media the last few days because he doesn't want to declare whether he's pro-life or pro-choice. As a leader, he is going to have to declare that. He cannot just be a minister of finance if he wants to be a prime minister. He is going to have to deal with social conservative issues, which he has been running from this entire campaign.
Our next question is for you, Mr. Baber. You emerged as one of the most vocal opponents of COVID-19 pandemic management policies, including lockdowns and vaccine mandates. Your positions led you to being removed from the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus. What do you say to Canadians who might be worried about how you would handle a future pandemic and whether you would be able to make the difficult decisions needed to save lives?
Absolutely, because I will entertain opinion, something that was sorely missing from our handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Look, I stood up for millions of Canadians who didn't have a voice because I believe that I serve my constituents. I don't serve the boss or the party leader. I serve Canadians who felt that the political class failed them, that failed to defend them against lockdowns, against the mental health pandemic, against their surgeries being canceled, against their cancer screenings missed, failed to defend their children that develop depression or eating disorders. I will put my record against anyone, but I want to come back to something I've heard here because I can just imagine myself right now in the audience and I'm listening to this. And we have one candidate accusing another of not being with a convoy and the other one with being with a convoy. Here again, we politicize the issue. Instead of talking about the underlying issue, which is making people do something against their will, which is forcing someone to make a decision between their ability to put food on the table and their personal healthcare choice. Can we not speak about the underlying issue? And here's another thing. I think Canadians are counting on us to do better. I have respect for every single candidate on the stage. I like everyone, even Jean, who can't get my name right. But I think that every single one of you would make a better prime minister than Justin Trudeau, that's for sure. And second of all, we have to remember what we're up against. We can't have a situation where any of us are so irreparably harmed. We cannot go out there and contest a general election. So I invite us to focus on the issues. Let's think about Canadians again. It's something that Canadians sorely want us to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. Next to you, Mr. Charest. You led a Liberal government in Quebec, and your record as Premier includes raising taxes and introducing a cap-and-trade program. Many Conservatives don't connect with you, and frankly, some are wondering why you're running for leader of this party. So I'm wondering if you can set the record straight. Are you a Conservative?
Thank you very much. And Roman, thank you for your comments. And Leslyn, I have a deep respect for the position that you hold on the issue of abortion. And I want to say a word about social conservatives tonight, because we may not agree on all issues, but who are the people who call themselves social conservatives? And I'm not a hyphenated conservative. But who are they if not people who have a faith-based life, believe in their families and their communities? Sounds like pretty good people to me. And they are part of our family, and they will always be part of our family, and they need to be respected. Now, in this room tonight is Preston Manning, who called before this debate that we act respectfully in the view of uniting the party after the leadership race. Well, so much for that, Pierre. In this race, I stand with a record as a conservative all my life. I'll give you an example, Candace. I believe in fiscal conservatism. The Liberal government that succeeded me, Mr. Couillard, that followed, left an $8 billion surplus after 15 years to Mr. Legault. $8 billion. You're not going to see that in your lifetime again. A higher credit rating in Quebec than Ontario. We reduced taxes. In fact, I reduced taxes in 2007-8, income taxes for middle-class, lower-income Quebecers, which actually allowed Quebecers to do better than Canada, the United States, or Europe, or Ontario during the Great Recession. The credit rating agency says one of the key decisions for us having a better performance, more jobs, more economic growth, was the fact that I reduced taxes, which was opposed by this person here, Pierre Poilievre. He was opposed to it back then. So enough of the hypocrisy. And on the Hill, I agree with Scott. This mess that we witnessed is the fault of Mr. Trudeau. But Mr. Poilievre, during that period, supported an illegal blockade. You cannot make laws and break laws and then say I will make laws for other people. I'm sorry, but that is a question of basic foundation and principle in my life.
You're out of time, sir.
Thank you.
All right, there will be time for rebuttal. Everyone will be given a chance to rebut what has been said about them. But before we get to rebuttal, we do have a question for Mr. Aitchison. So, the previous Conservative Party leader, Mr. Aaron O'Toole, ran for Prime Minister as a quintessential Ontario moderate. And we were promised by the Ivory Tower commentariat that that approach would win seats in the Toronto area. It did not work. Why should we believe that a conservative party led by you would bear different fruit?
Well, listen, it comes down to this. We need to be consistent in our message, and it needs to be a conservative message. And we need to work together. We were divided, and our message was not consistent in that election. And Mr. Trudeau effectively used vaccines as a tool to divide Canadians. And so if we can't go out and speak to Canadians in all parts of the country and make sure that we are trustworthy, that we don't scare them. Every time I hear a conservative talk about some conspiracy theory, I realize that there's another group of swing voters in the GTA that just are not going to come our way, because all we do is yell and scream at each other. We're witnessing it now. I actually like all these people on this table. They're on this dais as well. They're good folks. And here we are, calling each other names. What Canadian is going to trust this lot? We've got to do better. And that's how we win elections.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aitchison. So we're now going to move on to rebuttals. Every candidate will have an opportunity. At first, you'll get 30 seconds each to directly refute a statement made to any candidate of your choosing, and afterwards we'll move to an open debate. So we will start with you, Mr. Poilievre. You have 30 seconds.
Well, in addition to once again repeating a bunch of Trudeau rhetoric on our hardworking truckers, Mr. Charest misrepresents his track record on taxes. He raised the sales tax twice. I voted to cut them twice, Mr. Charest. He voted to raise the fuel tax, and that was on top of the consumer carbon tax he brought in. He brought in a health tax. He increased spending so much in Quebec that the government, as a share of the economy, grew by 25%. And he left a $1 billion deficit and the biggest debt of any provincial government in Canada. That is not the record of a fiscal conservative. I fought for lower taxes and balanced budgets and making life more affordable, and that is how we're going to win the election in the suburbs, by giving people their purchasing power back, something that I can do because I have a strong track record of fighting for it my entire life.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. Next, Dr. Lewis, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I just want to add to what Mr. Poilievre said, that Mr. Charest did raise taxes, and so I think it's unfair for him to single out Mr. Poilievre. I also want to speak to what Mr. Aitchison said. When you speak about conspiracy theories, there were a lot of quote-unquote conspiracy theories that came through. And actually, the Liberals actually use that to divide us. So I'm really surprised that you're here saying that we should unite while you're labeling your fellow conservatives as conspiracy theorists.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Next chance for rebuttal is over to you, Mr. Baber.
Thank you. I would echo something that Dr. Lewis just said. I like Scott a lot, but a lot of concerns that Canadians had over the last year to 2 years have actually come through. We still have between 15 and 20% of Canadians that cannot board a plane or a train. They're landlocked in their own country. How anyone can believe that this is allowable in our country is beyond me. Canadians are witnessing the continuous erosion of our democracy. And we should be mindful of this conversation instead of mocking them like the Prime Minister does.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. Next, we'll go over to you, Mr. Aitchison.
Well, thank you. I just want to quickly point out that I didn't label anybody a conspiracy theorist up here, but Leslie, you seem to take the mantle, so I'll leave that there. I don't know why you did. And I'll say to Roman, this party in the federal parliament has been fighting vaccine mandates. We've been fighting the ridiculous rules around travel. Melissa Lanceman, sitting in the audience here, has been an amazing member of parliament fighting this every step of the way. And she does it with respect. She does it with respect. She's effective, and she eviscerates the Liberals every day. And she does it with grace and style. We can do that. We can do it. Melissa Lanceman's the example.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. And final rebuttal is to you, Mr. Charest.
Thank you very much, Candace. Can I take a moment to lay to rest this accusation of being a liberal? No, but please, bear with me. Bear with me. I fought the 95 referendum, and I'm in this race because I believe in the unity of the country. I think Western alienation has lasted long enough. And what I see there, I've seen in Quebec. And I ran in 95. I fought in the referendum. And I went to lead a coalition in Quebec of Federalists when there was no Conservative Party of Quebec, ladies and gentlemen, as is the case in British Columbia. And you know what? I was successful. We pushed back on that referendum, and Canada stayed united. And believe me, if I was able to fight back the separatists, it's not this guy here on the stage tonight that's going to intimidate me and stop me from defending Canada. That's for sure. That will never happen. Count on it. And yes, and during the period of the Great Recession, we did reduce income taxes, and Quebec's economy did better than the rest of the country and better than much of the world. Why? Because that was the conservative thing to do, and we were successful in doing it. So Pierre, please, stop lying.
I'd like to respond to
So
something Mr.
we'll now
Aitchison said.
we'll now do 3 minutes of open debate, and I'm going to start with Mr. Polyev to respond to what was just said, and then we'll do 3 minutes of open debate.
I do want to respond to him.
I do want to respond. Look, it's your record that was liberal, Jean. You governed like a liberal. When you raised the sales tax, not once, but twice. Then you bring in a fuel tax. And then you decide that gas prices are still not high enough, and you pile on a carbon tax. And then you raise income tax in the form of something you called a health tax. That is not conservative, no matter what you call it. It's not your name as a party that was liberal. It was your track record of more debt, higher taxes, and more expensive government that was liberal, Mr. Charest. You can try to run from your record all you want, but the reality is that's what you did when you were there. And it is not just your record on fiscal conservatism issues. You blocked shale gas development. Now you claim you've changed your mind. You brought in a long gun registry after we got rid of it, going after farmers and hunters instead of inner city criminals. I could go down the list of all the liberal policies that you brought in that you're trying to hide from today, but we don't have enough time to go through them all. I am a true conservative. I've stood for the same things my entire life. I'm not just putting on temporarily a blue shirt to cover up a red shirt underneath it in order to take over the party.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. Let's go to you, Mr. Charest.
Well, we don't have to go down a long list. Why did you oppose the fact that I reduced income taxes? Yes, you were part of a government that opposed. You can't rewrite history, Pierre. You can't rewrite the facts to fit your rhetoric. You were in the House. You were part of the government that opposed the fact that I reduced income taxes. Yes or no?
No, I did not. I was not. I never commented on your
Okay,
income.
fine.
Frankly, Mr. Charest, you didn't cut income tax, so there was no income tax cut to oppose. You raised taxes. You raised consumption taxes.
Excuse me?
You raised health taxes.
Excuse
you
me?
raised every tax, and you canceled out any
Pierre,
minuscule reductions that would
Pierre,
otherwise have been realized.
If you can't
And
get that
furthermore,
right,
Furthermore,
if
Mr. Charest,
if you can't
Mr.
get
Charest,
that right, how can
Mr.
you get the
Charest,
rest right?
Mr. Charest,
we reduced
Mr.
income taxes,
Charest,
and the credit rating agencies
Mr. Charest.
actually said that that's what allowed Quebecers to come through the Great Recession much better than anyone else. If
Mr.
you're ready
Charest,
to, if you're ready to
Mr.
misrepresent
Charest,
those facts, what other facts are you misrepresenting?
You left Quebec the most indebted province in all of Canada. That is your record on finance. You raised the sales tax. No one will trust you in an election on inflation because you raised inflation when you raised the sales tax. I cut the GST. That's what the Harper government did. And if you take a minute to stop attacking the Harper government, which is the party that all of us are supposed to be part of, then maybe you would recognize all of the good that that man did for this country.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. We'll now move to Dr. Lewis for a quick rebuttal, please.
I'd like to respectfully say to my friend that I was not specifically speaking about anyone in our party when I referenced conspiracy theories. My concern is that we continue to run from tough issues because we do not want to be labeled conspiracy theorists. And then months later, these realities manifest itself. That is my point. As conservatives, we need to be strong, stand up to the liberals, argue tough issues, and not be afraid of being labeled like you tried to label me, Mr. Aitchison.
All right.
No,
We're
I still.
We're going to have to
No,
move
I still
on
have
for time.
rebuttal. I didn't get rebuttal.
Well, we're going to have future rebuttal opportunities, but we've got to move on for the sake of time.
This is not the Doug Ford caucus. Come
All
on,
right.
Jamil.
All right.
All right, so here's what I'm going to say. Excuse me.
No. Hey. Chill, bro. All right. So we're going to ask a common question to all 5 of you and give you an equal amount of time to respond. In this round, you will go one by one with 45 seconds, and then afterward, we will give you a chance for rebuttal. There'll be an open rebuttal where Mr. Babber and everyone else can rebut as much as they would like.
Well, not Mr. Babber, apparently.
So, Candace, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. The first question will go to you, Mr. Babber. So in the world of journalism, we're always told to follow the money. But in Canadian journalism, the money trail leads us right back to the federal government. The overwhelming majority of journalists in this country are either subsidized or funded by the government. And now the Trudeau government wants to start censoring and regulating the internet. Do you think it's appropriate for politicians to fund and regulate the journalists whose job it is to hold them accountable?
Of course not. And Candace, CBC News is no longer news. It's a communications arm for Justin Trudeau. How can media objectively cover the government when the government signs their paycheck? It's utterly impossible. You know, I was born in the Soviet Union. There was a newspaper called Pravda, and Pravda means truth. And I see no difference between what we're seeing in state-run funding. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to defund the CBC. I'm going to end all subsidies and bailouts, but I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to end the advertising relationship that government has with media. We've seen unprecedented media buys by government in the last couple of years. Many of them are self-serving. So there should be no more self-serving advertising on the taxpayer dollars. There's no democracy without independent media, and I'm committed to restoring Canada's democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Babber. Next, we'll go to you, Mr. Charest.
Well, Roman has put his finger on something that is going to be very important as we come out of COVID, and that's to do a very thorough audit of all the government spending on publicity, on how it was spent, where it was spent, who it went to, and what was the use. I think that Canadians need to know where their money went in regards to all that advertising, not just in the context of COVID, but also all government advertising. And that would be something that would be, I think, extremely important as we look ahead on how we deal with advertising and the media.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Next to you, Mr. Polyev.
I would defund the CBC. I would defund the CBC to save over $1 billion. And I would repeal the Internet Censorship Bill, C-11. That bill, yes. That bill came forward as C-10 in the last Parliament. I was the first MP to sound the alarm bell over that bill. And I joined with other MPs like Rachel Thomas in order to stop it from passing before the election was called. Not only will I get rid of that, but if they do decide to go ahead with this digital safety commissioner, who will have the power to take down what you post online, remove websites that it considers hostile to the government, I will fire that digital safety commissioner, and I will uphold and restore freedom of expression in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. Next to you, Mr. Aitchison.
Well, thank you. I'm actually inclined not to just burn down the CBC. I think that it used to serve a really useful purpose in this country in terms of our heritage and bringing us together. I think that it needs to be refocused. I think it needs to be reined in and obviously not be the arm of the Liberal government anymore. I agree with that. But I don't think burning it down is the answer. I also should point out that I was actually a member of the Heritage Committee when we were opposing Bill C-10 at the time, and we helped lead the charge to stop that bill from becoming law. And Pierre's right. He was, in fact, the first one to raise the alarm bell, and we did a really respectful, effective job at slowing them down, proposing reasonable amendments with experts. It frustrated the Liberals, and eventually, of course, Justin ran out of time on his other scandals, and we had an election. So we stopped them, and we did it in a really respectful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. And finally, over to you, Dr. Lewis.
Legacy media in general has become a propaganda arm of the Liberal government. We saw dishonest reporting during the trucker convoy. We were told that these truckers were committing acts of sedition and overturning our country. People were terrified. Instead, we saw that only charges of mischief were laid. I would defund the CBC and save Canadians $1 billion. I would repeal Bill C-11, and I would make sure that Canadians can have alternative news online. Most Canadians are getting their news online, and we should not have a two-tier media system which benefits and rewards legacy media.
Okay, another question that will be posed to each of you, and you will again have 45 seconds to answer. Our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is very eager to import American culture wars into our country. In 2020, he did this with Black Lives Matter. He is currently trying to do this with the sensitive issue of abortion due to what's happening with the US Supreme Court. As Prime Minister, how would you approach American culture wars, and how would you approach the eagerness of liberals to import them into our country? We'll start with you, Mr. Charest.
Well, this is central to this leadership race. We have a choice. And Canadians who are watching us see this choice. Either we're going to go down the road of American-style politics with the division and the polarization, the hot button, the sloganism, the attack dog attacks, or we're going to stay Canadian. And we will be the Canadian Conservative Party that we should be and that we're destined to be and that they want us to be. A national party able to connect all parts of the country, whether it's Alberta, Quebec, or Ontario. That is what we're destined to be. So, no, we should not import American politics into this country. And we should stand for what we believe in and the values that we believe in as Canadians. And I will fight that style, because for Canada, keep in mind, this type of politics, Americans may be able to survive. But for Canada, this type of politics will be extremely damaging to the fabric of the country. A country of regions, of languages, of diversity, should not have to put up with American-style politics.
Mr. Aitchison, over to you.
Well, I think I've raised it already, the example that I gave of Mr. Trudeau using vaccine status in the last election to try to demonize Canadians. And he continued to do it, even invoking the Emergency Measures Act when it was completely unnecessary to do so. It's disgusting, and we can't fall into the same trap. We need a message, and we need a leader who can communicate a message and a vision for Canada that talks about bringing us together, that unites this country from east to west, north and south, urban and rural. We got to stop demonizing each other. Canadians are amazing people, and there's more that unites us than divides us. And we need to focus on that in a positive message.
Dr. Lewis?
We need to focus on diversity of thought, on our diverse viewpoints that we have in this country. We need to recognize that we have diverse regions and that our country is being torn apart by regional alienation. There's so many aspects in so many areas in our country that are being neglected. The Atlantic region, the West, Quebec. These areas have their unique problems, and we cannot adopt US-style policies to fit our diverse country. We need to focus on making sure that we unite our country. National unity has been at an all-time low now, and it's time that we work together with our different regions to look at our unique strength and our cultural uniqueness.
Mr. Baber?
It's not American cancel culture wars. It's left-wing ideology cancel culture that's been on the move for the last 40 years, that's making its way through Western democracies and demonizes and tries to cancel anyone that disagrees with it. I have been standing up to cancel culture and radical left-wing ideology for the last 2 years like no one has in this country. I know exactly what this ideology looks like, and we have to call it out. And I think that Canadians would choose, instead of collectivism, instead of this ideological pie-in-the-sky utopia that failed everywhere around the world, Canadians just want to be left alone. That's it. And this is a message that we can be comfortable with. We should be comfortable calling out this ideology for what it is, and we should also stop the division with our neighbors to the south.
Mr. Polyev.
It's a very deliberate strategy. The radical left and the government and Justin Trudeau believe that if they can divide people on race, gender, and now vaccine status, and by next year they'll have thought of a new way to divide us, then that you'll be afraid of your neighbor and you'll turn to the state to give them more power. It's called divide and conquer. Don't worry that you can't afford food or a house or gas up your car. Be afraid of your neighbor or your trucker or your local coworker. That is a deliberate strategy. You see, control is something people fight over. Freedom is something you fight for. There's only so much control to go around. That's why people fight over it. However, there's enough freedom for everybody. If your neighbor gets more freedom, it doesn't mean you get less. If the immigrant gets the freedom to work as a doctor, you get the freedom to have a doctor. More freedom for one is more freedom for another. That's why we should unite for freedom.
We will now do 2 minutes of open rebuttal, and we will start with Mr. Baber.
Look, I guess in this hall, all I have to do is say Melissa Landsman's name and get some applause, right, Mr. Atkinson? Look, our party, back to Mr. Atkinson, our party refused to stand up for Canadians. We did not stand up for Canadians. No one on the stage stood up for Canadians until the truckers came to town. Thankfully, Dr. Lewis came around after the election, and I thank her for that as well. But we need to articulate to Canadians that we will have their backs no matter how prevalent cancel culture gets to be. Even when it gets difficult, we need to show moral clarity and say what we believe and do what we believe is right. But I'm also, and this goes back to the previous round, you know, I'm listening to some of the folks here, to some of my friends, and frankly, I'm a little disillusioned and I'm worried. I go from room to room where Canadians are counting on us to be better, where Canadians want to reinvigorate their belief in the Conservative Party, and I don't think that attacking each other scorched earth is going to win us an election. Let's look at ways to have a civil debate, and because we have a much tougher debate ahead of us in the general election.
1 minute left, open rebuttal. Anybody's welcome to interview.
Yeah, I've got one. Mr. Devaney, you know, if we're going to unite this country, we have to come clean. Mr. Charest needs to come clean with how much money he got from Huawei. We need to know the truth here. The Liberals are going to ask that. He's never told us how much he got paid. This is a company whose software and hardware has been banned from the 5G networks of 4 of the 5 I countries because of allegations, and in many cases proven, that they have used it for espionage. Mr. Charest, how much money did you get from Huawei when you were working for them, either directly or indirectly? Just the number, please. How much?
Mr.
Just the number.
Can I,
Mr.
are we
Charest.
talking about the company that Stephen Harper welcomed into
Just the
Canada
number, please. How
in
much?
2012?
How much, sir?
We're not on a student
How much?
council here, Pierre.
How much?
Pierre, this
How
is
much?
not a student council, please.
How much? This is the security
This
of our
is-
country,
this
Mr.
is-
Charest. It's not a laughing matter. How much did you get from Huawei?
This is-
Answer the question.
This is a
How much?
company that was welcomed into
How much?
Canada by
Well, then you
Stephen
shouldn't be
Harper
afraid to tell us
in
the truth about how much.
2012 for the telecommunications
How
companies.
How much?
And that's what Huawei
How
did.
much did you
Welcomed
take?
in by a conservative government.
How much did you
I'm
take,
very
Mr.
proud
Charest?
of the fact that I
Mr.
also
Charest,
worked
how much?
to
Answer
free
the question.
two Michaels and to
You're
bring them
acting
back
like-
home.
Oh,
and
right.
if you want evidence of that,
Right.
ask the wife
Right.
of Michael
Mr.
Kovrig.
Polyev, Mr.
Mina
Polyev,
Najibullah.
one at a time, please.
Huawei
One at a time.
paid you
Mr.
to free
Polyev.
the 2 Michaels. Come on. You got some swampland to
Mr.
sell us
Charest,
in
if you
Florida,
can
too?
continue.
Come on.
Mr. Can I?
How much?
Can I
Mr.
at
Charest,
this
please,
point?
the floor
How
is
much?
yours. Thank
Can
you.
I talk?
Answer the
Is it-
question.
Is this
Well,
the
yeah.
country you believe in, where people aren't allowed to talk?
I'd like to hear what
Please.
the number.
Can I
Answer
talk?
the question. Just
I
answer
want
the
to.
question.
I want to talk about this issue.
How much?
Mr. Polyev, let's give Mr. Charest a chance to respond.
Just the dollar figure, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jamil.
What are you hiding?
Thank you, Jamil. Can I ask a question? There's been a lot of talk of freedom right now. Well, I have a question for Mr. Polyev. There's
How
this
much?
bill in 21,
How
Bill
much?
21 in Quebec. This was a
How
piece of
much?
legislation that restrains the rights of Canadians to wear religious symbols. This proposal was put to me when I was Premier of Quebec, and I refused to do it, even if it was popular at the time to do it. I refused to do it. I stood up on principle. Now, when Bill 21 was enacted, I wasn't running in this race, and I pronounced against it, and I'm still against it. And in Quebec, this bill is very popular, and that doesn't make me any more popular in Quebec. But I want to ask something here. During this leadership race, I have said that if Bill 21 goes to the Supreme Court of Canada, my government will stand and speak to the interest of Canada. I will not be neutral on this issue for my country. Pierre Poilievre has said in French in Quebec, not elsewhere in the country, that if it goes to the Supreme Court of Canada, he will not speak on behalf of Canada. So Pierre, this idea of freedom, is it real or is it a slogan?
It's real.
Okay, we're,
Why won't you stand up for
Gentlemen,
Canada?
gentlemen,
Why won't you stand up in the
Gentlemen,
Supreme Court for those who are affected?
Gentlemen,
It's real.
in the interest of time, we're going to need to move on, but there will be, again, more opportunity. In
I
fact,
don't
the
get a
two
chance
of
to
you,
the
the two of you are
I gave him
actually,
15 chances to answer
two
my
of you-
question. He couldn't do it. At least give me one chance to answer his. Fine.
30 seconds, go ahead.
Wow. Really? Come on.
30 seconds. You 30 seconds.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
30 seconds to each of you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, listen, Mr. Charest actually brought in the Forerunner law in Quebec to this. He brought in a law to ban women who wear face coverings from receiving any provincial government service. So now that he's here in Ontario, he takes exactly the opposite position and over to pander. It's another example of him flip-flopping. I'm against Bill 21. I have said I was against Bill 21 in English, in French, in Quebec, in English Canada. I'm 100% against it. I said if I were a Quebec politician, I would vote against it in the legislature. If anyone proposed it federally, I would vote against it. And
That's
if I
30
was Prime
seconds.
Minister, I would make sure it would never happen in this country. I'm 100% against Bill 21.
That's 30 seconds.
and
Mr.
gentlemen.
Charest, 30 seconds to you.
This is a very important moment in the debate. Mr. Poilievre has not said, but his position is that if this bill goes to the Supreme Court of Canada, he will not speak on behalf of Canada. That's what he said in French in Quebec. If you have flip-flopped on it, Mr. Poilievre, say so tonight. But you said to the French press in Quebec that contrary to Charest, if it goes to the Supreme Court of Canada, you will not defend the interests of those who are affected.
That's 30 seconds,
This,
Mr. Charest.
take good note, because that speaks to his concept of freedom, ladies and gentlemen.
That's 30
Is
seconds,
there
Mr.
anything
Charest.
more important than freedom of religion? I don't think so.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to some new questions, and this question is going to be posed to Mr. Baber, Mr. Aitchison, and Dr. Lewis on the topic of healthcare. The COVID crisis has revealed the weaknesses in Canadian Medicare, its lack of surge capacity, its exorbitant costs, and its ever-lengthening wait times, which deny Canadians timely care. What is your position on healthcare reform? Do you think a mixed healthcare system of private and public services is the answer to Canadians' concerns? We'll start with you, Dr. Lewis.
I think we need to redefine healthcare so that it's meeting patient needs. And we saw with COVID, the vaccines were administered in private settings, even though the governments paid for it. So we have the capacity to engage in public-private partnerships, and we should contemplate that. We should not be protecting a flawed and outdated system. We also need to create a pandemic response, and that should not come from a global organization like the WHO. We need to fix our healthcare system, because if an infectious disease can shut down our system, then we know we have a broken system. Lockdowns are a symbol of a broken system. We cannot be caught off guard again. We need to make sure that we prepare for the next pandemic, and we need our own pandemic plan.
Mr. Baber.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to get government out of our relationship between ourselves and our doctors. I don't think that government has a role in there. But Canada has one of the most deficient healthcare systems in the world. We have one of the lowest number of beds per capita among OECD countries. And there's no question that we need to address this shortage and potentially look at a capital expansion. But we can't do it until the provinces get their act together. We need more nurses and less compliance officers. We need less waste and duplication. I am actually pleasantly surprised, and I welcome Jean's comment on this issue. I think that there is room for supply-side healthcare within the framework of the Canada Health Act. That's where we have more options that are still single-payer. We need to get serious about fixing healthcare in this country, especially with an aging population. I'm going to be having a serious conversation with the provinces about a capital expansion, but we need to get the waste under control.
Mr. Aitchison.
Well, listen, I agree completely that part of the reason we had so many lockdowns is because we had a fragile healthcare system. Yep. We wear this as a badge of honor. It's part of our identity as Canadians that we think we have the best healthcare system in the world, and we simply do not. If you have critical care problems, if you have issues that are going on for a long time, it takes forever to get care in our system. We have to not be afraid of having a broader conversation. We have to take the polarization out of it. The Dutch model is actually a brilliant one. I've been reading about it. But we have private sector already in our healthcare. It's a multi-level sector. We can do so much better if we have the conversation. It's a system that was predicated on a promise that was made back in the late 60s on the federal government paying 50% of the cost of healthcare. We've never done it. We've never lived up to the promise. We have a federal government that generation after generation meddles in provincial affairs to buy votes, and everything they do is mediocre. We need to improve what we're doing. We need to have a real relationship with the provinces, and we need to live up to our promises as a federal government and live up to solving this problem for Canadians and making sure that we look at all models around the world. We always think about the American model, but there's a lot of models out there that are a lot better than ours, and we need to have an honest conversation about it.
To each candidate who answered the question on healthcare, we'd like to give you 30 seconds of rebuttal time. So we'll start with you, Dr. Lewis.
I think it's important that we end hallway medicine. Every single year that we have the flu pandemic, we see hallway medicine. This did not just come about with COVID. We have to make sure that we work with the provinces to reduce wait times. People should not be waiting for surgeries, nor should they be waiting for simple things like MRIs that could be delivered in a private setting.
Yeah, 30 seconds to you,
I
Mr.
cannot
Babber.
believe that Mr. Aitchison is justifying lockdowns by looking at our healthcare system. We should never be excusing lockdowns, and neither should Mr. Charest say that if we have better healthcare, we will not need mandates. No, we do not need lockdowns. It was the greatest catastrophe perpetuated on our generation. We've actually made healthcare a lot worse, with cancer screenings missed, with a mental health pandemic, with surgeries delayed. We knew who the virus attacks. We knew who we had to protect as early as May 2020, but instead we succumbed to the left-wing cancel culture mob, and we continued not owning up to what we understood as early as spring 2020. We should never excuse that.
If I could just add, I'm certainly not excusing lockdowns with the healthcare system. I think that in the early days of the pandemic, we didn't understand it. We didn't really know what was going on. And that really was the biggest reason why we did have lockdowns, because we were worried about our healthcare system. We didn't understand things. Subsequently, of course, lockdowns like vaccine mandates and everything else has been used by Liberals to divide us and to continue to divide us. So let's stop dividing each other here, and let's focus on improving our healthcare system and making sure that we learn something from what happened in this last 2 years over this ridiculous pandemic. We need to learn from this and do better.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aitchison. We're going to move on to a new topic, talk a little bit about pipelines. So this question is
Excuse me, Candace. Roman referred to me. Can I?
So this question is going to you and Mr. Polyev. So if you want, you can
But
take
it's on a different subject.
It's on a different subject. You can take a second to respond to him after I'm done with this question. Thank you. So the conflict in Ukraine has emphasized the need to wean Europeans off of their dependency of Russian oil and gas. Canada, of course, can be an important player, and according to a recent Ipsos Reid poll, 75% of Canadians agree that Canada should export more oil and gas to Europe. But here's the problem. Politicians in Quebec continue to oppose and block energy projects. Mr. Charest, your government banned fracking. The following government, Philippe Quillard, his government introduced a block of the Energy East pipeline, and now the current Premier François Legault has recently announced a total ban on oil and gas exploration and production in the province of Quebec. So here's the question. Do you support increasing oil and gas exports? And if so, how do you work with Quebec as a player in achieving this national goal? So we'll start with you, Mr.
The answer
Chair.
is yes. I support oil and gas. I support pipelines. In fact, the last pipeline built in Quebec was built under my government. And yes, when I was Premier, I supported Energy East, and I supported Energy East after I was Premier. In fact, I worked with TransCanada at the time, and one of the things that I'd propose, because if you understand how our federal system works, there's different ways to get things done. And what I thought should happen is that the pension fund in Quebec, called the Caisse de dépôt, should buy part of the project. That would have been a creative way to get this project done. And if you have experience and you understand how our federal system works, that's the kind of leadership that you need. Now, what we see in Ukraine is cruel. It's cruel. I mean, it's heartbreaking. We could be an alternative, and we're not. Now, looking to the future, I think we should do GNL Québec in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. And of course, the government of Quebec is opposed to it, but now circumstances have changed. The issue of security of supply is on the table. The issue of supplying Europe is on the table. And yes, we can do that and also transition to zero emissions in 2050. Europe has a policy of saying we're going to transition by using nuclear and natural gas. If Europe, and this was before the war in Ukraine, if Europe says that, if they believe they can do it, Canada can do it. But you need a prime minister who understands how the federal system works and is going to work with the provinces to make that happen. It's the only way. And if someone has a track record of making those things happen, I do.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Mr. Polyev.
We are importing 130,000 barrels a day from overseas in the East Coast. Meanwhile, we have the third biggest supply of petroleum on Earth, right here in Canada. Why is that? Well, Bill C-69 makes it next to impossible to build a pipeline or to expand an oil sands mine. The federal approval process is so bureaucratic and slow, the gatekeepers stand in the way and prevent people from actually building resource projects. So what is my plan? I will repeal Bill C-69 and replace it with a simple, direct process that consults First Nations, protects the environment, but gets projects started. 2, I will give my support to approve Newfoundland's project to increase by 400,000 barrels a day its production so that that oil can displace all of the overseas oil that we're bringing by tanker to St. John, New Brunswick. And within 5 years, I will have banned dictator oil from Canada altogether. Furthermore, I disagree with Mr. Charest on natural gas. He banned shale gas in Quebec. We need shale and tight gas and other forms of natural gas, and we need to approve the liquefaction process so that we can cool it down, put it on ships, send it overseas, and break European dependence on Russian natural gas once and for all. If Mr. Charest had not banned natural gas in Quebec, we might be able to do that already. But I will not only support those projects, but I will support liquefaction processes so that we can ship our natural gas to Asia. The closest point in North America to Asia is British Columbia. The closest point in North America to Europe is Newfoundland. We have a massive geographic advantage, and we have a weather advantage because liquefying natural gas is a process of cooling it down. What do we have in Canada? Cold weather. It is our most abundant natural resource. So let's cool it down, turn it into liquid, send it overseas, sell it, and turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people.
I'll give you each 30 seconds to respond to one another, and I want to specifically re-ask the question, how would you work with the people of Quebec and the Premier of Quebec to get Canada's energy to market? Mr. Charest, to you.
Well, it's going to take a lot of work. You can't impose it, Candace. I want to be very clear. Anyone who thinks that in this federal system of government, the federal government can just walk in and impose it, needs to remember something called the National Energy Program. And if you remember the National Energy Program, that's what happened the last time a Trudeau went into Alberta and said, we're going to go over your heads and get this done. You need to find ways that will incentivize them to do it. And that means a new reality, but also in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, a huge mobilization of people who believe in that project. The same is true for New Brunswick, for example. This LNG plant in New Brunswick that was built for the purpose of importing needs to be retrofitted now for the purpose of exporting gas. And that's the work that needs to be done. But I'll tell you something, if you are going to get that done in a federal system of government like ours, you're going to run into folks in Alberta who are going to say to us, no, you're not going to, the feds are not going to impose on us anything about natural resources. It has to be a cooperative approach. And that's exactly what I practiced all of my political life.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Mr. Polyev, 30 seconds.
Well, the problem is that the Trudeau Liberals are imposing on Alberta. They're imposing rules that make it impossible for Alberta to export its product and also even to send it to other Canadians. So we need to repeal C-69, C-48. We need a simple process for future approvals, and we need to speed up the approvals of all natural resource projects so that it's not just oil and gas, but also lithium, graphite, cobalt, and countless other minerals that are staying in the ground today because it takes 5 or 6 years to get anything approved in this country. Get the gatekeepers out of the way, get digging mines, building jobs, producing paychecks. Thank you.
Our next question is for Mr. Baber, Dr. Lewis, and Mr. Polyev. Your fellow leadership candidate, Mayor Patrick Brown, chose not to participate in today's debate. We can only speculate as to why. We don't know. But what we do know for certain is that some Canadians are concerned that Mayor Brown is sowing division in our country. He has been criticized for manipulating diaspora politics to bolster his campaign. How does your strategy to grow the party differ from Mayor Brown's, and what will you do to engage Canadians of diverse backgrounds? Over to you, Mr. Baber.
Thank you. Look, I come from a North Toronto riding. We need to, first of all, appeal to urban voters. And that means we should feel comfortable talking about urban issues like transit. I'm in favor of building mass transit. Like housing, I'm going to offer a very robust housing plan by doubling the first-time homebuyers exemption, by divesting ourselves of federal land that is not protected. And also, we need to expand our base by talking to new Canadians. I'm an immigrant to Canada myself, and I've had every blessing this country had to offer. I've had an opportunity to contribute to this country. God knows I've paid enough taxes, thankfully. And I would also say that, look, we have an aging demographic. We need to welcome lawful immigrants to Canada. I think that immigrants come to Canada for democracy and opportunity. Those are conservative values. We should not be ceding them to the Liberals. I'm going to go out and expand the Conservative Party movement by appealing to urban voters and new Canadians.
Dr. Lewis.
I am in a unique position to be the best candidate to grow our base amongst new Canadians. I myself came here when I was 5 years old. Immigrants are natural conservatives. They have strong family values. They believe in hard work. They have strong faith values. And we have ignored that population. We need to reach out to them and connect with them on a values level. I am in a unique position to be able to do that. I understand the struggles that they've endured. I know what it's like to have a student loan. I know what it's like to juggle being a student and working and also teaching at law school. These are things that speak to the struggles that many immigrants have, and we need to be able to connect with them. Many of them left their countries, they took risks, they came here. These are inherent conservative values which we need to connect on.
Mr. Polyev.
Well, listen, the bottom line is that Patrick Brown says one thing in one room and exactly the opposite in another room. and that is what he has done throughout this campaign. It's what he did when he ran for leader of the Ontario PC Party. He said that he was against the carbon tax, and then as soon as he became leader, he embraced Trudeau's carbon tax and said he would do Trudeau the favor of imposing it right here in Ontario. I've said the same thing on that issue and all other issues throughout my entire political career, and that is what I will continue to do. So how do we reach out to Canadians? We have a clear, consistent, conservative message before the leadership race and after the leadership race, so that Canadians know that we mean what we say. Thank you.
We're going to move on to the next question, which is for Mr. Aitchison and Mr. Charest. So there are 5 candidates up on this stage. We have 3 Ontario members of Parliament, 1 Ontario member of the provincial Parliament, and 1 former Premier of Quebec. Note that there is no one from Western Canada. The Conservative Party of Canada has long represented the values, sensibilities, and opinions of the majority of people in Western Canada. So if you were leader of this party, how would you support Western Canadians? How would you stop the next iteration of a Reform Party split? And how would you keep this party and then this whole country united? We'll start with you, Mr. Charest.
Well, Candace, you just described the reason why I'm running. And on the very first day that I announced that I was running, I went to Calgary. And it was a gesture and a message that I want to be a prime minister for all of Canada, including Alberta, that I support Albertans, that we know that they feel left out and they feel they're not acknowledged and they're not recognized for their extraordinary contribution to the country. And the reason I'm running, Candace, is because I've seen this before. And we cannot take our country for granted. None of us should make the grave mistake. You see what's happening in Russia now. None of us should ever make the mistake of taking our country for granted. We owe this to our children and our grandchildren. This is a battle I fought once, and I don't want to go down that road again. And we are the party. How much time do we have to? Canadians are looking at us and saying, be that national alternative. Be the party that history and destiny wants you to be, that bridges Alberta and the rest of the country. Now, in this election campaign, friends, that's a choice you have. I can't choose for you, but I can promise you this. If you want a national Conservative government, if we want to move beyond 15, 19, and 21, if you want to retire the 32 Bloc MPs in Quebec because I am their retirement plan, you're looking at them, and then I will be the leader that will unite the party.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Charest.
elect a national Conservative government.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Same question to you, Mr. Aitchison.
And thank you for it. Really, it comes down to me. It's about respect. It's about dialogue. It's about listening to each other. I arrived here in 2019 after a long career, part-time career in municipal politics in Huntsville, the last 5 years as mayor, and I was alarmed at how many people in leadership positions in Ottawa didn't understand the first thing about leadership. It's about empowering. It's about inspiring the people and the team around you to great things. It's about engaging. It doesn't happen. And we need to do it in our movement. We need to do it in this country. As a member of Parliament, a new member of Parliament, I've been to Alberta 3 or 4 times now. The first time I went to visit with Mr. Tom Kimmich. We went to tour some facilities, and everybody just kept saying, "You're from Ontario? You're an Ontario member of Parliament? What are you doing here in Alberta?" And I said, well, I have a national role now. I think it's important to understand the entire country. And that was foreign to them. We need to listen to each other. We need to do it in our caucus. We need to do it in our movement. Unity is not uniformity, but it is finding the compromise that moves us forward and shows that we have the courage and the character to be trusted to govern and lead this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. We're now going to open it up to open rebuttals on this question. So everyone will get 30 seconds to respond on how you would keep Canada united. We'll start with you, Mr. Baber.
Thank you. Well, I think, first of all, we have to recognize that there is life outside of Ontario and Quebec, okay?
I agree.
And we have to bring the provinces and we have to bring Canadians coast to coast into the national conversation. Second of all, I think that we should unite our country behind a theme of economic opportunity, which I will unleash by making Canada into the natural resources superpower that we ought to be. And finally, I think that we need to respect our regional differences, but at the same thing, remember that we're all Canadian. And I'm seeing some of our Canadian values being eroded in the last couple of years, whether it's democracy or Canadian kindness that I talk about often. We need, like my friend Scott Atchison says, restore civility to the national conversation. We need to start loving Canadians again. We're a wonderful country coast to coast, and we need to welcome everyone into the national conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Baber. Over to you, Dr. Lewis.
We need to respect the various regions of our country. If we look at even a province like Alberta, we have implemented laws that have crippled their economy. Bill C-48 and Bill C-69 actually favors foreign companies over Canadian companies. We need to make sure that Ottawa stops disrespecting certain regions. Even in the Atlantic region, the development of their natural resources are being inhibited by national laws. And we need to make sure that each region comes together and their strengths help to bring prosperity to our nation.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Mr. Polyev.
Well, despite winning 7 elections in Ontario, I'm actually a born and bred Calgarian. I understand the West. Yes, applaud that. I understand the West. I grew up there, spent my first 2 decades there. My family still lives there. And I'm proud to fight for Western Canadians in Ottawa, even while I am an Ontario MP. I also remember the days when the National Party got too liberal and we lost Western support. That risk still remains. And that's why we need someone who is truly conservative, who will stand up against carbon taxes and long gun registries and fight for the values that unite us across the country as conservatives. Only by uniting all conservatives in all regions of the country will we win the next election and bring fairness to every province. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. Mr. Aitchison, you have 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, I have 30 seconds to rebut what I've just
Well,
heard.
30 seconds to add to anything about national unity or keeping the party together.
Well, I don't think there's a lot more to add, frankly. I mean, I think what's I think dismaying is that you see an awful lot of division, even in this race. There's a lot of, if we put on a show that is divisive and nasty with each other, I just don't see how that unites all conservatives. I don't see how it shows to Canadians that we can govern and we can lead. We have to be more respectful with each other. We can disagree without being disagreeable, and that's the only way to unite our movement.
Thank you. And final word to you, Mr. Schrey.
I actually think it would be a breath of fresh air to have a prime minister in Ottawa who has been a premier of a province and who understands how this federal system works. And I talk from experience. I was part of a government that had Albertans and Quebecers and Ontarians at the table. And you know what? When that happens, all of a sudden people that seem far away in another region, they have faces, they have names, they have families, and they share the same values. And big things get done. In this country, big things can't get done unless there is that leadership. I'll give you an example on Energy East. Did you ever hear Mr. Trudeau say, I am in favor of Energy East? Do you think a project of that size can get done if there's no leadership? Someone who grabs it and goes? I know, I've done it. And that's the kind of prime minister that I want to be, and I will be. And that will be true for Albertans and for all Canadians. But we need to do that. In fact, when that happened, those were the days when the National Energy Program was axed, when we had people around the table who agreed on those things. That's when Canada is at its best. But please, allow us to be that party. Allow us to meet that ambition and to be ambitious enough to grow our economy and recognize every Canadian as being equal and every Canadian as being part of the Conservative family.
Thank you all for your responses. It's now time for closing statements, and we will go in the reverse order of the opening statements and start with you, Dr. Lewis.
Canada is the best country in the world, and I want to make sure that the opportunities that I had growing up in this great country as a child will be there for future generations. Millions of Canadians can't travel on a plane in their own country. Our charter needs to be defended. Parents have a right to raise their children in accordance with their values, and I will introduce a parental rights bill to stop government encroachment on parental rights. Seniors, disabled, veterans have a right to live in dignity, and every single reserve should have clean water. We must restore freedom and prosperity to Canada once again by bringing back jobs and developing our natural resources while protecting our environment. I will use my education in environmental studies and international law to defend our sovereignty against global organizations like the WHO and the WEF. I will strengthen our democracy and bring back freedom and prosperity to Canada once again.
Mr. Aitchison.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight and contributing to the future of our movement and of our country. Our values and principles are timeless. Acting on them and leading with respect is the right approach for our movement's success. Our politics are increasingly divided, and we have stopped respecting those that we disagree with. If we Conservatives are going to grow our party and succeed, we cannot try to out-divide Canadians the way Justin Trudeau does. We must lead with respect and bring our country together. This is the right approach to attract Canadians to our movement, and it is the way to lead to better government that's capable of delivering results. We need real, principled leadership in Ottawa that unites Canadians, and that's why I'm running to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Whether it's affordability, defending free speech, housing, foreign affairs, we are living in extraordinary times. Working together, we can make life better for all Canadians. But first, we must work hard to invite more of them to join us in this quest. And that starts by leading with respect. Thank you.
Mr. Poilievre.
As I said at the outset, people feel like they're losing control of their lives. It could be the teenager sunk into depression because of 2 years separated from sporting and social activities. Or the trucker who, after being called a hero for 2 years delivering our products and services across the border without a vaccine, suddenly became a villain or a lawbreaker in the eyes of some Liberals. Or the 32-year-old living in his parents' basement because home prices has doubled. Or the single mom skipping meals so her kids don't have to. I'm running for Prime Minister to give these people back control of their lives by ending vaccine mandates so that people can make their own medical decisions, by tackling the inflationary deficits and taxes that have driven up the cost of living, and reining in the Bank of Canada back to its original mandate, and also banning it from bringing in a central bank digital currency. I'm running for Prime Minister to restore economic freedom, but also freedom of expression, so that people can speak clearly and openly without fear. I'm running for Prime Minister to make this the freest country on earth, so you can take back control of your life. Thank you.
Mr. Charette.
Thank you. I'm running to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And the parties needs to, I think, accept the challenge of Canadians, because this is our moment, to meet that challenge so that we can unite the party and unite the country. It's nothing less than that. It is an extraordinary task, but one that requires a lot of determination to stand up and fight for what is right, including, as we heard tonight, about Bill 21, which is a test of real leadership. Let's not lose sight of the fact that if we are divided, that hangs on Justin Trudeau. He's the Prime Minister of the country. The number one responsibility of any Prime Minister is to keep the country united. The number one. All else won't count if we are divided. And if there's one thing that I believe in and have fought for all my life, and I've paid the price because I've fought for my children and my grandchildren, and I have fought for you, it's the ideal of Canada. And I will make this ideal as great as it always has been by leading a national Conservative government.
Last but not least, Mr. Baber.
Thank you. I was born and grew up in a communist regime. I know the value of democracy, and I see Canada's democracy being eroded. And I will end censorship, 21st century segregation, and ensure free and independent media. I come from very humble beginnings, but I helped build and grow a small business, and I know what it's like to pay the bills. And I'm committed to you and your child's Canadian opportunity. I'm not a career politician, and I don't play the game. I was the only one on this stage to oppose the narrative at a great cost to my career and to my loved ones. Because I'll always stand up for Canadians, even when it's unpopular. And that's what you can expect from me. I'm not afraid of politics or left-wing ideological cancel culture. I will always say what I believe and do what I believe is right. And even if you disagree with me sometimes, that's okay, that's democracy, but you will always know where I stand. Being here with you has been an honor of a lifetime, but I ask you to kindly rank me first, and I would be incredibly grateful to lead our party and our country.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to all of our leadership candidates.
Well done.
Now, we thank you all for joining us. Of course, again, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Meta, for providing coverage of tonight's debate on Facebook Live. We'd also like to thank our presenting sponsor for tonight's debate, Earnscliffe. You are all encouraged to stay, socialize, have a good time with one another at our welcome reception, which is located on the 3rd floor. Also, a reminder that our program will begin at 8:30 a.m. back in this room, where we will hear remarks from the Honorable Candice Bergen, Interim Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. On behalf of the team at the Canada Strong and Free Network, thank you for attending. Enjoy your evening.